If you dance this tango, I'll marry you." The billionaire mocked the waitress, but she did what no one expected. Before we begin, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Henry Scott, the most talked about billionaire in New York. Young, handsome, and with an ego as big as Wall Street. He held a glass of champagne like he held his own power, surrounded by businessmen and socialites, all eager for a single glance from him. Amid forced laughter, Henry showed off his arrogant charm until a tray slipped. The sound of breaking glass brought silence to the ballroom. At his feet stood Callie Brooks, the event's waitress, frozen, pale, her eyes locked on the expensive shoe she had just soaked. Henry looked down, then slowly raised his gaze. His perfect face, cold stare, and posture showed he wasn't used to being challenged, let alone soaked. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Henry asked, wiping his shoe with a linen napkin, every word dripping with sarcasm. Callie swallowed hard but kept her chin up. "I do. Apparently I gave the wrong shoe a bath in humility." A collective "oh" spread through the room. Some covered their mouths to hide laughter. Others simply watched closely, as if about to witness a duel. Henry raised an eyebrow, his smile barely visible. "You think this is funny?" "No. I think it's fair," she replied, calm but firm. The billionaire leaned back slightly, sizing her up like she was an unusual object. He was the picture of arrogance. Custom suit, a watch worth more than Callie's car, and that look of someone who believed the world revolved around his tie. "That's bold coming from someone who serves drinks," he muttered. "And that's a pretty big ego for someone who can't handle a few bubbles," Callie shot back. Muted giggles rippled through the room. Henry took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. The orchestra, sensing the tension, stopped playing. Then he raised the untouched glass in his other hand, smiled at the guests, and said loudly, "Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like tonight just got more interesting." All eyes turned to him, waiting. "Since Miss Brooks enjoys a challenge," he went on, theatrically, "I have one for her. If you dance a tango with me right now, I'll marry you in front of everyone." A wave of laughter echoed around them. Cell phones began to rise discreetly. Callie stood still for a second. Then she smiled. A small, confident smile, dangerously bold. "Then get ready, Mr. Scott," she replied calmly, "because you're about to dance the most unforgettable tango of your life." The ballroom fell silent. Laughter faded from everyone's lips. Henry blinked, surprised. He expected shame. He expected begging. He didn't expect courage. "You're saying yes?" he asked, not quite believing it. "I'm saying I hope those new shoes glide well on the floor," she replied, extending her hand with playful irony. For a moment, Henry seemed to hesitate, but then, convinced the scene would work in his favor, he accepted the challenge. He took her hand, firm, almost dominant. The lights dimmed. The orchestra struck up a bold tango. The crowd moved in, curious. Henry led the first step, awkward, stiff, trying to show control. Callie followed smoothly, with calm confidence, her eyes locked on his. The contrast between them was striking. He used to power, she used to surviving. And she's the one who transformed the dance. With every step, Callie regained something she had lost long ago, lightness. Her feet moved with precision, her hips marked the rhythm with grace. The shy waitress vanished, replaced by a woman who owned the floor. A murmur spread through the crowd. No one expected her to know how to dance. Henry, on the other hand, started to lose the rhythm. He tried to take over, pulling her strongly, but Callie responded with subtle firmness, guiding him back to the music. She was leading. Soft laughter came from the crowd. The mighty Henry Scott was being led by a waitress. He tried to recover, but Callie spun and pulled him into a flawless move. The crowd held its breath. Henry almost lost his balance, and she caught him, steady, before he could fall. The room burst into applause and laughter. Henry, red-faced, tried to hide his embarrassment. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he murmured through gritted teeth. "Very much. Want to give up, Mr. Scott?" she teased, smiling. He didn't answer, but something in his eyes had changed. Arrogance gave way to something new, admiration, perhaps, or curiosity. The music swelled. Callie moved with passion, her red hair swinging under the golden lights. Every step sent a message, every look a challenge. Henry tried once more to take the lead, but it was too late. The audience was already captivated by her. The melody reached its peak. Callie spun firmly and finished the tango with a decisive step, making Henry kneel without even realizing it. The ballroom erupted in applause. Breathless, Henry tried to play it cool, adjusting his jacket. "Not bad for a waitress," he muttered, trying to sound sarcastic again. Callie gave a half-smile. "Not bad for a man who can't dance." The crowd laughed. The tension turned into cheers and whistles. But then, a voice rang out from the back of the room. "That explains everything. This young lady is the daughter of Bethania Brooks, the legendary tango dancer." Everyone turned to Callie. She froze, her eyes filled with tears, but her smile stayed. "It's true," she said softly. "Bethania Brooks was my mother." A respectful silence fell over the ballroom. Henry stared at her, surprised. "So you inherited her talent?" "No, Mr. Scott, I just inherited her courage not to bow my head," she replied. The crowd, now moved, started applauding on their feet. Callie took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears. Henry, still unsure what to say, stepped forward. "Callie, No need, Mr. Scott," she cut him off with a smile. "I didn't dance for you. I danced for me. And for my mother." She stepped back, looked around, and added firmly, "Oh, and don't worry. I don't want to marry some spoiled rich guy who doesn't even know how to dance tango. I just did this to knock down your ego." The ballroom burst into laughter and applause. Henry stood there, stunned, watching as she walked away, head held high, her dress swaying to the rhythm of the music still echoing. At the door, Callie turned one last time. "Thanks for the stage, Mr. Scott. That was a great debut. Oh, and watch out for the shoe, champagne stains." And she left. The ballroom roared. Henry, alone at the center, took a deep breath. Still frozen, he felt something new, something all his money could never buy. True admiration. That waitress had challenged and disarmed him in a way he never expected. The next morning, Callie woke up to her phone vibrating non-stop. It was 6 a.m., and she was still in her waitress uniform from the night before. Half asleep, she grabbed her phone and saw dozens of notifications. Messages, likes, shares. Her heart raced. She opened the app and froze. The video of her dancing tango with Henry Scott had already passed 2 million views. The comments flew by. She crushed his ego. "Who is this tango goddess?" Henry Scott got humiliated live. Callie tossed the phone on the bed and rubbed her face. This couldn't be real. She just wanted to work, earn her paycheck, and go home quietly. But now the whole world knew her face. The phone rang. It was Diane, the catering manager. "Hello?" Callie answered, trying to sound calm. "Callie, where are you?" Diane's voice was cold, almost sharp. "At home." "Why?" "Because you're fired." "Don't come back." Callie suddenly sat up in bed. "What?" "Diane, I just danced. I didn't do anything wrong." "You made headlines, Callie. Our clients don't want waitresses who draw attention. They want discretion. You ruined that." The call dropped. Callie stared at the phone, stunned, fired, for dancing well. She let out a dry laugh. Of course, because humiliating, arrogant billionaires isn't on the menu. The days that followed were a roller coaster. The media wouldn't stop talking about her. Some articles praised her, calling her the waitress who challenged Wall Street. Others mocked her, saying she was trying to get famous off of Henry Scott. The worst part was when they started digging into her life. They found out her mother, Bethania Brooks, had been a famous dancer in the 90s, but died young, leaving Callie alone. They found out she lived in a tiny apartment in the Bronx, worked 3 different jobs, barely able to pay her bills. Callie tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. Every time she went outside, someone recognized her. Some asked for photos, others laughed. She didn't know which was worse. A week later, she was sitting on her worn-out couch, eating instant noodles straight from the pot when the buzzer rang. "Who is it?" she asked, wary. "Delivery for Miss Brooks." Callie frowned. She hadn't ordered anything. She went downstairs and found a courier holding a thick, elegant envelope. "Please sign here." She signed and went back up, curious. She opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter on fancy stationery. The handwriting was flawless, almost annoyingly perfect. "Miss Brooks, I'd like to propose a professional partnership. I need a tango instructor to help me prepare for a gala event in 6 weeks. The payment will be generous. I look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely, Henry Scott." Callie read the letter 3 times before bursting into laughter. Real loud laughter, until her stomach hurt. "He's joking, right?" she muttered to herself. "He thinks I'm going to teach that rich guy to dance? After everything?" She crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash. But the next day, another letter arrived. Then another. And another. They all said basically the same thing. Henry Scott needed her. The pay would be fair, and he wanted to make things right. Callie tried to ignore it, but the truth was cruel. She was broke, unemployed, and the bills kept coming. On the fifth letter, he included a blank check. She looked at that thin piece of paper and sighed. Is this humiliation or desperation? She decided it was time to respond. She picked up the phone and dialed the number from the letter. "Mr. Scott's office," answered a secretary in a professional tone. "This is Callie Brooks. Tell your boss the answer is no." "Are you sure?" Mr. Scott was very clear about, "I'm sure, thank you," and she hung up. 2 hours later, Henry Scott was at her apartment door. Callie opened it and almost shut it again when she saw him. "How did you get my address?" "I have resources," he replied, smiling with that arrogance she knew too well. "Resources or invasion of privacy?" she shot back, crossing her arms. Henry sighed. "May I come in?" "No. 5 minutes." 3. He gave a small smile and walked in. The apartment was small, simple, but clean. Henry looked around curiously but didn't say anything rude. Callie noticed that and was surprised. "Well?" she asked, impatient. "I need your help," he said, straight to the point. "And I need peace, not happening." "Callie, I know I messed up that night. I was arrogant, rude, and you embarrassed me in front of everyone. And you know what? I deserved it." She blinked, surprised. "Wow, that was almost an apology." "It was an apology," he corrected her, serious. "And I'm here because I have an important event in 6 weeks. A gala dinner with international investors. There'll be a dance performance, and I need to be ready. If I mess it up, I lose a multi-million-dollar contract." Callie crossed her arms. "And why should I care about your millions? Because I'll pay you $50,000 for 6 weeks of lessons." The silence was heavy. Callie swallowed hard. $50,000. That could solve her problems for a whole year. But she couldn't accept. Not from him. "No," she said firmly. Henry frowned. "Why not?" "Because I don't trust you. I think this is just another way to humiliate me." He stepped closer. "Callie, I don't want to humiliate you. I want to learn. For real." She stared at him, trying to read his intentions. But Henry Scott was a locked box. "No," she repeated, opening the door. "Now leave." Henry hesitated but stepped out. At the door, he turned around. "I'm not giving up, and I'll keep saying no." He gave a slight smile. "We'll see." The following days were a silent battle. Henry sent flowers, messages, even a full breakfast basket. Callie ignored everything. But then, the rent bill arrived, and she had no way to pay it. Sitting on the living room floor, staring at the pile of bills, Callie closed her eyes and sighed. "I'm going to regret this," she muttered. She picked up the phone and called. "Mr. Scott's office. This is Callie Brooks. I accept, but on my terms." The next day she was in his office, signing a contract she had written herself. Henry read every line carefully and signed without complaint. "There," he said, offering his hand. "We're partners." Callie shook his hand firmly. "We're teacher and student, nothing more." He smiled. "Whatever you say, teacher." The first lesson was set for the next day at a private dance studio Henry had rented. Callie arrived on time, wearing sweatpants and a plain t-shirt. Henry was in a suit. "You're going to dance in a suit?" she asked, incredulous. "I always wear suits." "Then you'll learn to dance in one. Good luck with that." She turned on the music and started teaching the basic steps. Henry tried to follow, but he was clumsy, stiff, clearly used to giving orders, not taking them. "Relax your shoulders," Callie instructed. "They are relaxed. They look like an ironing board." Henry groaned. "Are you always this gentle with your students?" "Only with the ones who pay well," she replied, smiling. They kept going. Henry stepped on her foot twice. On the third time, Callie stopped the music. "Are you mad at the music or at me?" "Neither," he replied, annoyed. "Then why are you dancing like you're stomping ants?" He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I'm not good at this, okay? I noticed," she said, crossing her arms. "But if you don't relax, you're going to keep being terrible." Henry stared at her. "Are you always this blunt?" "Always. It's part of the deal." He let out a short laugh. "At least you're honest." Callie gave a half smile. "Now go back to step 1, and this time, try not to kill my foot." The lesson continued, tense but intriguing. They argued with every move, but something was starting to shift. Henry, who was used to being in control, felt completely thrown off by Callie. And she, in turn, was starting to notice that maybe he wasn't just arrogance in a suit. In the middle of a turn, Henry lost his balance and fell straight to the floor. Callie stopped, surprised, then she started to laugh. Loudly, unable to stop. Henry, now red, also began to laugh. That was ridiculous, he admitted. It was hilarious, she corrected, still laughing. For the first time, they laughed together. But then Henry's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his face changed completely. "Excuse me," he said, walking out of the room. Callie was left alone, curious. She leaned near the door and caught bits of the conversation. "Clara, I already told you that?" "No, that's not how." "Clara, stop." Callie frowned. "Clara? Who was Clara?" She spent the whole night thinking about that name. Clara. Who was this woman? A girlfriend? A business partner? An annoying relative? The curiosity was eating her up, but she knew she couldn't just ask. Henry Scott wasn't the kind of man who opened up easily. The next day, she walked into the studio determined to find out. Henry was already there, looking at his phone, his face as closed off as a locked door. "Good morning, teacher," Callie greeted with irony. He barely looked up. "Good morning." Callie frowned. Where was the man who laughed with her yesterday? All that was left was the cold, distant robot in a suit. "Everything okay with you?" she asked, dropping her bag on the floor. "Perfectly fine," he answered, still not looking at her. "Oh sure, you look like a ray of sunshine." Henry finally looked up, his gaze cold. "Can we start the lesson, please?" Callie crossed her arms. "Of course, sir. Let's do it then." She turned on the music and started teaching the steps. But Henry was completely off. His steps were too heavy, his grip too tight, and it felt like he was fighting the music instead of dancing with it. "Henry, relax," Callie asked, trying to stay patient. "I am relaxed. You look like a broken robot." He stopped dancing and stared at her. "Do you have a problem with the way I dance?" "I do. You're dancing like you're mad at the floor." "I'm not mad at anything," he snapped, his voice louder than usual. Callie stepped back, surprised. "Wow. Okay, someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed today." Henry took a deep breath, trying to stay calm again, but it was too late. The anger was already bubbling. "You know what, Callie? Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe you just don't know how to teach." Callie blinked, stunned. Then she started laughing, not out of humor, but out of sheer disbelief. "Oh, I see. So when you fall flat on your butt, it's my fault. When you step on my foot 3 times, it's my fault. Interesting. I didn't say that. Yes, you did. You just did. But you know what I think? I think you're mad about something else, and you're taking it out on me." Henry clenched his fists. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're a robot in a suit who can't deal with emotions." The silence that followed was heavy. Henry stared at her, his eyes dark with anger, but also something else. Pain, maybe. "You have no right to judge me," he said in a low, almost dangerous voice. Callie shrugged. "And I don't have patience for people who blow up for no reason. So if you want to keep doing these lessons, I suggest you stop acting like a spoiled child." Henry took a step forward, his face tense. "Spoiled? Spoiled," she confirmed, standing her ground. "You have everything, Henry. Money, power, influence. But you act like the whole world has done you wrong. And you know what? That's pathetic." He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He just stood there, looking at her with a mix of anger and surprise. Callie sighed and grabbed her bag. "I'm leaving. When you decide to act like a human being again, give me a call." She walked out and slammed the door. Henry was left alone in the studio, breathing hard, heart racing. He knew he had gone too far. He knew Callie was right, but admitting that was harder than dancing any tango. 2 hours later, Callie was sitting at a cafe near her home, drinking hot chocolate and trying to forget the horrible morning she'd had. She was about to order a slice of pie when her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. She opened it, curious. "Want to know who Clara is? Search Henry Scott wedding canceled." Callie frowned. Who was sending this? And why? But curiosity got the better of her. She opened her browser and typed in the words. The results popped up instantly. Billionaire Henry Scott left at the altar. Bride runs off with pianist hours before ceremony. Henry Scott in love scandal, betrayal and humiliation. Callie clicked one of the articles and started reading. The story was shocking. 3 years ago, Henry Scott was about to marry Clara Mitchell, an heiress from a well-known Boston family. Everything was ready: the church, the guests, the party. But just hours before the ceremony, Clara disappeared. She left a letter saying she'd fallen in love with someone else, a pianist who played at a small bar in Greenwich Village. The scandal was huge. Henry became a joke in high society. The press was relentless. Callie set her phone down and started laughing, not because she thought his pain was funny, but because the irony was just too much. The man who publicly challenged her to dance, jokingly proposing marriage, had once been left at the altar. It felt like something out of a bad movie. But then she stopped laughing, because suddenly a lot of things started to make sense. His coldness, his trouble trusting people. That explosive anger earlier that morning. Henry Scott wasn't just an arrogant billionaire, he was a man who'd been hurt. That night, Callie got a message from him. "Sorry about today. Can I see you?" She hesitated but replied, "Where?" "At the studio, please." Callie sighed, grabbed her coat, and went. When she arrived, Henry was sitting on the studio floor, leaning against the wall. Still in his suit, but his tie was loose and his hair slightly messy. He looked tired, human. "Hey," he said when he saw her. "Hey," Callie replied, staying by the door. Henry looked at his hands. "I was a jerk today." "You were," she said, not holding back. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "You don't make things easy, do you?" "Never have. Not starting now." Henry sighed and finally looked at her. "I want to explain. About today. About everything." Callie crossed her arms. "You don't owe me anything, Henry. I'm not your therapist. I know, but I want to." She hesitated, then sat on the floor too, a few feet away from him. "Then go ahead." Henry took a deep breath, like he was about to jump off a cliff. 3 years ago, I was going to get married. The woman I loved, or thought I loved, left me at the altar. She ran off with another guy, a pianist who played in some rundown bar. Callie said nothing, just listened. Everyone found out, the media, friends, business partners. I became a punchline, and since then, I stopped trusting people. I stopped believing anyone could want me for who I am, not for what I have. He paused, voice lower now. "That's why I acted the way I did at the gala. I was trying to prove to myself that I was still in control, that no one could hurt me again. Then you showed up, and danced with me, and totally caught me off guard." Callie felt something stir in her chest. Maybe empathy. Maybe worse. "And the call yesterday?" she asked. "Was it her?" Henry nodded. "She calls from time to time, apologizing, wanting to talk. I never answer. Yesterday I did. It was a mistake." Callie stayed quiet for a moment, then sighed. "Look, Henry, I get it. You've been hurt. We all have in one way or another. But that doesn't give you to lash out at people who are just trying to help." He nodded. "I know, and I'm sorry, really." Callie looked at him, trying to decide if she believed him. Deep down, she did. "All right," she said at last, "but if you blow up again, I'm gone. And this time, I won't come back." Henry smiled, just a little, but it was genuine. "Fair enough." Callie stood and held out her hand. "Let's start over. No yelling, no robot in a suit. Deal?" He took her hand. "Deal." They stayed there a while longer, talking about random things, laughing at silly jokes, and for the first time Callie saw Henry Scott not as an arrogant billionaire, but as a real person. Flawed, wounded, human. By the time she left the studio, it was late. The sky was dark, and the New York streets glowed under the streetlights. Callie picked up her phone to call a cab and saw a new message from an unknown number. She opened it, heart suddenly racing. "He'll destroy you too." Callie froze, read the message again, then looked back at the lit-up studio where Henry still was. Who sent that? And why? She put her phone away and started walking, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Callie spent the whole night staring at that message. "He'll destroy you too." The words felt like they were burning through her phone screen. Who was sending that? And why did they care so much about what was going on between her and Henry? The next morning, she woke up determined to ignore it. It was probably just some bitter ex-employee of Henry's, or maybe some obsessed fan of Clara. Rich people always had hidden enemies around. She wasn't going to let one anonymous message ruin the work she had been doing. But when she got to the studio, something felt different. She felt different. More cautious, more distant. Like there was an invisible wall between her and Henry. Henry noticed right away. "Good morning, teacher," he greeted with a smile. "Good morning," Callie replied without looking him in the eyes. She dropped her bag in the corner and went straight to turn on the music. Henry frowned. Everything okay with you? Perfectly fine. Shall we begin? He shrugged and got into position. The lesson started, but something was off. Callie taught the steps in a mechanical way, without her usual energy. She corrected his mistakes with short phrases, none of the playful teasing that used to make them both laugh. Henry tried to make small talk a few times, but she avoided it, until he finally stopped mid-move. Okay, what's going on? Nothing. Keep dancing. Callie, you've barely looked at me today. What happened? She sighed and crossed her arms. Nothing happened, Henry. I'm just doing my job. Ah, I see. So now we're just being professional, is that it? We've always been, she replied coldly. Henry stepped forward, his look questioning. Last night we talked, we laughed, you said we were going to start over, and now you're acting like I'm a stranger. What changed? Callie hesitated. She couldn't tell him about the message, not without sounding paranoid or dramatic. So she simply said, Nothing changed. I just remembered where I stand here. Henry was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he gave a half smile. It wasn't a happy one. It was teasing. Ah, so that's it. You're scared. Callie blinked. Scared of what? Of trusting me. She laughed, without humor. Henry, I barely know you. Why would I trust you? Because I trusted you yesterday. I told you things no one else knows. And I appreciate that, but it doesn't change the fact that you hired me to teach tango, not to be your friend. Henry took another step, closing the distance between them. So you don't want to be my friend? Callie held his gaze, defiant. No, I want to do my job, get paid, and move on with my life. Liar. She raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? You're lying. Last night you cared. You listened to my story. You stood by me. And now you want to pretend none of that happened because you're afraid to get close. Callie felt her face heat up. He was right, and that irritated her deeply. You're very arrogant, you know that? And you're very stubborn, he replied, smiling. They stood there, staring at each other in a silent battle of wills. Until Henry sighed and stepped back. Fine. If that's what you want, we'll keep it professional. But just know, I don't believe a single word you said. Callie didn't reply. She just went back to teaching the steps. But now there was something different in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. The following days were a strange mix of forced professionalism and subtle teasing. Henry kept testing her boundaries, making little jokes, holding her waist a second longer than needed during certain steps, looking her in the eye in a way that made Callie's heart race. She tried to keep her distance, but it was getting harder and harder, until one Thursday night, Henry surprised her with an invitation. Dinner at my place tomorrow. What do you think? Callie, who was putting her things in her bag, stopped and looked at him. Dinner? Yeah, food, drinks, conversation. You know, things normal people do. Why? Henry shrugged. Because I want to, and because you deserve a thank you for the progress I've made. Callie hesitated. Every alarm bell was ringing in her head, but at the same time, she wanted to go. She wanted to know more about him, about his life outside the studio. All right, she agreed at last. But no fancy stuff, okay? I'm not the caviar type. Henry laughed. I promise it'll be simple. The next day, Callie showed up at Henry's apartment wearing jeans and a simple blouse. She rang the doorbell and waited, nervous. When the door opened, she almost laughed. Henry was wearing an apron, a ridiculously floral apron that clearly didn't belong to him. Don't laugh, he said seriously. This apron belonged to my grandmother. Your grandmother had terrible taste, Callie replied, stepping inside. The apartment was huge, but surprisingly cozy. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the lights of New York, and the open kitchen was a complete mess. You're cooking? Callie asked in disbelief. Trying, he corrected. But it's not going so well? She walked over to the stove and saw a pot with something that was supposed to be tomato sauce, but looked more like lava. Henry, what is this? Carbonara sauce. Callie picked up the spoon and tasted it. She made a face. This isn't carbonara. This is a crime against Italy. He crossed his arms, pretending to be offended. Oh, so now you're a chef too? No, but I know carbonara doesn't have ketchup. I didn't put ketchup in it. Then why does it taste like burnt ketchup? Henry looked at the pot, confused. I honestly don't know. Callie started laughing, and so did Henry. The tension from the past few days melted away in that ridiculous moment. "Step aside," she said, pulling off his apron. "Before you burn down the apartment." "I was doing fine. You were creating biological weapons." Callie took over the kitchen while Henry watched, leaning against the counter, smiling. She made a simple pasta, sautéed garlic and fresh tomatoes, and in 20 minutes, a decent dinner was ready. "Here. This is real carbonara," she announced, serving the plates. They sat at the table, and Henry brought a bottle of wine. When he tried to open it, the cork popped so hard that wine splashed right onto Callie's shirt. "Henry! Sorry, I swear that wasn't on purpose." Callie looked at her soaked shirt and started laughing. "You're a walking disaster, you know that?" "I'm starting to realize that," he admitted, grabbing a dish towel. They ate between laughter and light conversation. Callie shared funny stories from jobs she had, and Henry surprised her with childhood memories that were unexpectedly simple. After dinner, Henry had a brilliant idea: dessert. "Henry, please don't," Callie begged. "Trust me, I don't." But he was already mixing ingredients in a bowl. 5 minutes later, the smoke alarm went off. Black smoke poured out of the oven. "What did you put in there?" Callie yelled, opening the windows. "Brownies. I just followed the recipe." The recipe didn't say to set it on fire. They managed to shut off the alarm, but the apartment was filled with smoke. Callie looked at Henry, covered in flour, with a chocolate smear on his face, and burst out laughing. You're impossible." Henry laughed too. And suddenly, the two of them were laughing so hard they could barely breathe. When they finally calmed down, they just stood there, looking at each other. The kitchen was a mess, smoke hung in the air, and dinner had been a disaster, but something had changed. Henry stepped closer. Callie didn't move away. He lifted his hand and gently wiped a bit of flour from her cheek. The touch was soft, almost hesitant. "Callie," he murmured. She swallowed hard, her heart racing. "Yes. I wanted." But he didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he leaned in and kissed her. It started soft, almost shy. But then Callie responded, and something between them snapped. The kiss deepened, intense, filled with all the tension built up over the past few weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both were out of breath. "That was unexpected," Callie whispered. "It was," Henry agreed, smiling. They stayed there for a few more seconds, just looking at each other, until Callie remembered where she was. I need to get my phone," she said nervously. "I left it in the living room." "Of course." Callie walked to the living room, trying to process what had just happened. Her heart was still pounding, and her lips tingled. But then she saw it. On the coffee table, half hidden under a magazine, was a document. The word "confidential" was printed at the top, and below it her name, Callie Brooks. She picked it up, hands trembling, opened the first page, and froze. It was a full investigation. Her job history, address, even old photos of her with her mother. Henry had investigated her, without permission, without saying a word. "Callie?" His voice came from the kitchen. "Did you find your phone?" She didn't answer. She just stood there holding the document tightly, the anger rising in her chest. Henry appeared in the doorway, smiling, but the smile vanished when he saw what she was holding. "Callie, what is this?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. "I can explain." "Explain what, Henry?" "That you investigated me like I'm some kind of criminal? That you went through my life without asking?" "It's not like that," he said, taking a step forward. "Then what is it?" she shouted, throwing the document on the table. "You decided you had the right to know everything about me before hiring me? Or did you think I was hiding something?" "Callie, I just wanted to make sure that—" "Make sure of what? That I wasn't a con artist? That I wasn't going to steal your things? Congratulations, Henry. You did it. You found out everything about me, even things I barely remembered." Tears began rolling down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of anger. "I trusted you," she said, her voice breaking. "I really thought you had changed, but you're still the same, thinking you can buy everything, even people." "That's not it," Henry said, desperate. "Callie, please. No, I'm done. The contract, the lessons, everything. It's over." She grabbed her bag and walked toward the door. "Callie, wait." She stopped at the door but didn't turn around. "You still think everything has a price, Henry, but some things don't, and trust is one of them." And she left, slamming the door. Henry stood in the middle of the room, alone, the silence pressing down on him like a ton of bricks. The next morning, a knock on the office door pulled him out of his thoughts. It was Thomas, the private investigator he had hired weeks earlier. "Mr. Scott," Thomas greeted him, holding a thick folder. "What do you want?" Henry asked, drained. "I have something you need to see." Thomas placed the folder on the table. On the cover, written in bold letters, "Callie Brooks, full dossier." Henry looked at it, his stomach turning. He wasn't sure if he wanted to open it, but he knew he had to. With hesitant hands, Henry opened the folder. The first pages held information he already knew: Callie's work history, old addresses, financial records. Nothing unusual. Then he turned the page and froze. There was an old, faded photo. A girl, maybe 10 years old, smiling next to an elegant woman. Bethania Brooks, Callie's mother, and beside them, a man in a suit. His face was partly cut off, but something about the image unsettled Henry. He kept reading, and what he found took his breath away. Callie's father hadn't just disappeared. He had a name. A name Henry knew very well. Richard Palmer. Henry dropped the folder like it was on fire. Richard Palmer was one of his company's biggest investors, a powerful, respected man with connections all over Wall Street. And he was also the man who had abandoned Callie and her mother when she was only 12. "This can't be right," Henry whispered, rereading the document. But it was. Everything matched. Dates, locations, even old photos Thomas had pulled from some forgotten archive. Richard Palmer was Callie's father, and she probably had no idea how close he was now. Henry grabbed his phone immediately and called her number. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. She had blocked him. "Damn it," he muttered, slamming the phone onto the table. Thomas cleared his throat. "Mr. Scott, there's more information in the file. Maybe you'd want to." "No," Henry cut him off, closing the folder. "I've seen enough. Thank you, Thomas. You can go." The investigator hesitated, then left. Henry was alone in the office, staring at the folder like it was a bomb about to explode. He had to tell Callie. She needed to know her father was nearby, that he was a partner in the company. But how? She wasn't answering his calls, wasn't replying to messages, and probably hated him right now. Henry rubbed his face, exhausted. Everything was falling apart. Hours later, his secretary Veronica walked into the office without knocking. She was efficient, always polished, but there was something about her that always rubbed Henry the wrong way. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, like she expected something he would never give. "Mr. Scott, I need you to sign these papers," she said, placing a stack of documents on his desk. Henry barely looked up. "Leave them there. I'll sign them later." Veronica didn't leave. She stood there, staring at the closed folder on the desk. Henry noticed. "Do you need anything else?" he asked, impatient. "No, I just thought maybe you could use someone to talk to. You seem tired." "I'm fine," he replied coldly. Veronica nodded and finally walked out. But Henry didn't notice that she had seen the name on the folder, and that later that night she would return to the office and read every word of it. 2 days later, hell broke loose. Callie woke up to her phone buzzing with notifications. Again. But this time it was worse, much worse. The headlines were everywhere. Waitress who humiliated billionaire is daughter of Richard Palmer, investor accused in financial scandal. Callie Brooks, from abandoned girl to opportunist. The dark past of the dancer who captured Henry Scott. Callie felt the ground fall out from under her. She clicked one of the articles and started reading. Every word was a knife. They told everything. How her father had abandoned the family, how he'd been involved in old fraud scandals, how Callie had grown up in poverty while he built an empire. And at the end of the article, there was a photo, an old picture of her and her mother, laughing at a birthday party, a photo she kept locked away in an album at home. How did the press get their hands on that? Callie threw her phone across the room and sat on the floor, trembling. She could barely breathe. Her life was being torn apart again. And this time, there was no way out. In the days that followed, Callie became a target for mockery. Cruel comments on social media, articles making fun of her story, even people on the street cracking jokes. She couldn't take it anymore. She packed a small suitcase, grabbed a few clothes, and left New York without telling anyone. She went to a little coastal town called Cape Haven, a few hours away. A place where no one knew her, where she could breathe without feeling the weight of judgmental eyes. She found a job at a small, simple cafe, serving homemade pies and fresh coffee. The owner, an older man named George, didn't ask questions. He just hired her and left her alone. And for the first time in weeks, Callie was able to sleep without nightmares. Meanwhile, back in New York, Henry was beside himself. He had seen the news, read every horrible article, and he knew exactly where it had all come from. The dossier. That damn dossier he'd left on the table. He called Thomas back and demanded an investigation. Who had entered the office? Who had made copies? The answer came far too quickly, and it was devastating. Veronica. Henry felt a cold rage take over. Veronica had stolen the dossier, copied everything, and leaked it to the press. And when he confronted her, she didn't even try to deny it. "I did what I had to do," she said coldly. "That waitress was using you, Henry. She just wanted your money, your fame. I protected you." Henry stared at her, stunned. "You destroyed her life. You exposed secrets she didn't even know about. So what?" Veronica snapped, her eyes shining with something dangerous. "She didn't deserve you. I do. I've always been here, always supported you, but you never saw me." Henry took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "You're fired. Get your things and get out of my office, now." Veronica went pale. "Henry, you can't." "I can, and if you ever try to contact me again, I'll make sure you never work anywhere again. Understood?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just grabbed her bag and left, slamming the door behind her. Henry sank into his chair, exhausted. Everything was falling apart, and the one person he wanted by his side was far away, probably hating him more than ever. But he wasn't going to give up. Not this time. He hired another investigator, not to spy on Callie, but to find her. And 3 days later, he got the answer. Cape Haven, a cafe called Sunset Brew. Henry didn't think twice. He got in the car and drove for 4 straight hours, stopping only for gas. When he reached the small town, it was late afternoon. The sun was starting to set over the ocean, painting the sky orange and pink. He found the cafe easily. It was small and cozy, with wooden tables and floral curtains. And there she was. Callie was wiping down a table, her red hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing a simple apron. She looked tired, but also lighter, like she had finally found a place where she could breathe. Henry walked in slowly, and when the bell above the door rang, Callie looked up and froze. "You," she said, her voice filled with restrained anger. "Hi," said Henry, unsure what else to say. Callie dropped the cloth on the table and walked over, her eyes blazing. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you. I need to talk to you." "There's nothing to talk about," she replied coldly. "You've said enough. Or better yet, your dossier said it all." "Callie, I didn't leak that. It was my secretary. I fired her the moment I found out." She crossed her arms. "And does that change anything? You investigated me, Henry. You invaded my privacy, uncovered things I didn't even know, and stored it all in a file like I was a problem to be solved. I know. I made a mistake. A huge one. But I came here because you need to know something. I don't want to hear anything from you. Callie, your father, he's in New York. He's one of the investors in my company." The silence was deafening. Callie blinked, trying to process. "What?" "Richard Palmer. He's one of my biggest investors, and I found out he's your father. I was trying to tell you when everything blew up." Callie sat down on a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "My father is in New York. And you work with him." "Yes." She looked at Henry, her eyes filled with tears. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I found out the same day you walked out of my apartment. And after that, you blocked me. I tried to warn you, Callie. I swear I did." She covered her face with her hands, trying to process everything. Henry took a step forward, hesitant. "Callie, I know you don't trust me anymore. And I get it. But I came here because I care about you. I really do. And I want to fix this. Please let me try." Callie looked at him, tears running down her face. She wanted to scream, to yell, to tell him to leave. But at the same time, she saw something in his eyes. Something that felt real. Regret, and maybe something more. Before she could answer, Henry's phone rang. He looked at the screen and went pale. "What is it?" Callie asked. Henry answered the call, and what he heard made his world fall apart. "Mr. Scott, it's urgent. Richard Palmer is gathering the other investors. He's trying to force you out of the company. And it looks like he has the votes." Henry hung up, stunned. He looked at Callie, who was still waiting for an answer. "Your father," he muttered. "He's trying to destroy me." Callie looked at Henry, seeing the panic in his eyes. Part of her wanted to say he deserved it, that it was karma. But another part one she was trying to ignore, felt something else, concern. "When's the meeting?" she asked, her voice softer than she meant it to be. "Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock, Henry replied, running a hand through his hair. "If I don't show up, they'll vote without me, and I lose everything." Callie crossed her arms, thinking she had every reason to let him deal with it on his own, but something in her just couldn't do that. "You've got a 4-hour drive ahead of you," she said, checking the time. "If you leave now, you'll get to New York before midnight." Henry looked at her, surprised. "You're helping me?" "No, I'm just being practical. Now go before I change my mind." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Come with me." "What?" "Come with me to New York. I need you, Callie, not just for the company, for me." Callie laughed, but without humor. "Henry, are you serious? Why would I go back to that mess?" "Because the man trying to ruin me is your father, and you deserve to face him just as much as I do." Silence filled the space between them. Callie knew he was right. Richard Palmer had abandoned her when she needed him most. And now he was back, pulling strings like everyone's life was a game. She sighed, defeated. "I'm going to regret this, probably," Henry said, smiling for the first time. Callie took off her apron and shouted to George in the kitchen. "George, I need a few days off." "How many days?" he shouted back. "I don't know. Maybe forever if this goes badly." George appeared in the doorway, confused, but shrugged. "All right, girl. Good luck with whatever this is." Callie grabbed her bag and followed Henry to the car. The drive back to New York was tense at first, but little by little, they started talking. About the company, about Richard Palmer, about what they were going to do once they got there. "So, what's the plan?" Callie asked, biting into a chocolate bar she'd bought at a gas station. "I need to convince the other investors not to vote against me, to show that Richard's doing this for personal reasons, not business ones." "And how are you going to prove that?" Henry hesitated. "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." Callie rolled her eyes. "Great. So we basically have no plan at all. Do you have a better idea?" "Not yet, but I'll come up with something. After all, you're not exactly a strategy genius." Henry laughed, and for the first time in days, he felt like maybe all wasn't lost. They arrived in New York just before midnight. Henry took Callie to a quiet hotel before heading home. The next morning at 7 sharp, he knocked on her door. "Ready?" he asked when she opened, still in her pajamas. "Henry, it's 7 in the morning. The meeting's at 9. "I know. But we need to stop by the office first. I have documents that might help." Callie sighed and shut the door in his face. "Give me 20 minutes. 30 minutes later, she stepped out wearing jeans and a plain blouse. Henry looked at her, a little unsure. "You're going like that?" Callie frowned. "What's wrong with it?" "Nothing. It's just, this is an investor meeting. People usually dress more formal." "Henry, I'm an unemployed waitress. This is my formal outfit." He opened his mouth to reply, then ended up laughing. "Fair enough. Let's go." At the office, Henry rummaged through files while Callie sat in a chair, eating a donut she'd grabbed from the reception area. "You really think there's something here that can help?" she asked with her mouth full. "There has to be. Richard's not perfect. He must have left something behind." Callie stood up and started going through the folders too. And then she saw something. An old envelope with Richard Palmer written by hand. "Henry, what's this?" He took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a letter dated 3 years ago. A letter from Richard offering money for Henry to sign a shady contract. Henry had refused back then, but the letter was proof that Richard had been trying to manipulate him for a long time. "Will this work?" Callie asked hopefully. "It will," Henry confirmed with a smile. "It's perfect." The meeting was held in a luxurious room at the top of the building. When Henry and Callie walked in, all eyes turned to them. Richard Palmer sat at the head of the table, flawless, with a confident smile on his face. "Henry," he greeted, his voice full of fake warmth. "I didn't think you'd come." "I wouldn't miss this for anything," Henry replied, taking his seat. Callie stood beside him, uneasy under all those stares. Richard noticed her and frowned. "And who's this young lady?" Callie took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I'm Callie Brooks, your daughter." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard turned pale, his eyes wide. The other investors looked at each other, confused. "My daughter?" Richard repeated, his voice trembling. "Yes, the daughter you walked away from 15 years ago. Remember me? Or did you forget you had a family before becoming this important man? Richard tried to collect himself. Callie, this isn't the time or place for this. Oh, it's not, she shot back, arms crossed. Then when would be? When you're ruining someone else's life? Like right now? One of the investors, an older man named William, cleared his throat. Mr. Palmer, what's going on here? Richard cleared his throat. This is personal. It has nothing to do with business. Yes, it does, Henry interrupted, standing up, because his reason for wanting me out of the company has nothing to do with business. It's personal revenge. That's ridiculous, Richard snapped. Henry placed the old letter on the table. Then explain this. A letter from you 3 years ago trying to bribe me into signing an illegal deal. I refused, and since then, you've been trying to sabotage me. The investors picked up the letter and started reading. Richard's face turned red. This doesn't prove anything, he stammered. It proves you're not trustworthy, William said, tossing the letter back on the table. And if you're using the company to settle personal scores, then maybe you shouldn't be here. Richard looked around and realized he was losing control. Then his eyes landed on Callie. It was you, he accused, pointing a finger. You came here to humiliate me, didn't you? Callie stepped forward and looked him straight in the eye. No. I came here because you're my father, and because, despite everything, I thought you deserved to know I exist. But now I see you haven't changed at all. You're still the same selfish man who left behind a sick mother and a little girl. The words hit Richard like a punch. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Callie turned to the other investors. You want to know why he's doing this? Because he found out Henry hired me, and he thinks he can protect me by destroying someone else's life. But I don't need his protection. I never have. William looked at Richard, disappointed. I think we need to reconsider this vote. Richard tried to protest, but it was too late. One by one, the investors voiced their support for Henry. There was no need for an actual vote. After the meeting, Callie stepped out of the building and took a deep breath. Henry followed her. You were amazing in there, he said. I just told the truth, she replied, avoiding his eyes. Henry stepped closer. Callie, thank you for everything. You didn't have to do that. I know, but you didn't have to come looking for me either. They stood there on the sidewalk, looking at each other. Something had changed between them. The anger had turned into something else, something warmer, something real. But before either of them could speak, Henry's phone rang. It was William. Henry, I need to warn you. Richard hasn't given up. He's planning something. Stay alert. Henry hung up, worried. Callie, I think your father's not done with this. He never is, she murmured. But I won't let him ruin everything again. The next few days were a mix of tension and unexpected moments. Henry and Callie worked together to strengthen his position in the company. They met with investors, reviewed contracts, and even came up with a ridiculous disguise to sneak into a secret meeting where Richard was planning his next move. Callie wore a blonde wig and huge glasses, while Henry dressed up like a pizza delivery guy. I look ridiculous, Henry complained in the elevator. You're ridiculous, Callie said, laughing. Despite the chaos, something was growing between them. Shared laughter, glances that lasted longer than they should, hands brushing accidentally. But Richard Palmer was watching, and he didn't like what he saw. A week later, Henry invited Callie to an important business party. It was a gala event, and he needed to show strength in front of his partners. You want me to go? Callie asked, surprised. I do. I need you there. Besides, you deserve a good night after everything. Callie hesitated, but eventually said yes. On the day of the event, she got ready carefully, wearing a simple but elegant dress she had bought from a discount store. When Henry saw her, he was speechless. You look beautiful, he managed to say. Callie blushed. Thanks. You don't look too bad yourself. The party was full of important people. Music, champagne, elegant conversations. Callie felt out of place, but Henry stayed close to her, proudly introducing her to everyone as the woman who saved my company. Everything was going fine, until Richard Palmer showed up. He walked up to the stage and asked for everyone's attention. The room went silent. Good evening, he began, his voice steady. I'd like to make an important announcement. Henry felt his stomach turn. Callie squeezed his hand, tense. I recently discovered something disturbing about Mr. Henry Scott, Richard went on. A few months ago he made a bet with a friend, The bet was to win over a woman, just to prove his power. And that woman is here tonight. All eyes turned to Callie. She went pale. "That's not true," Henry whispered, desperate. But Richard kept going. "I have proof. Messages, recordings, everything is documented. Henry Scott used my daughter as part of a cruel game." The room exploded with murmurs. Callie looked at Henry, her eyes full of tears. "Callie, you have to believe me," he begged. "I never did that. You were never part of any bet." But she couldn't hear him. The pain was too much. Feeling used, betrayed, she let go of his hand and ran out. Henry tried to follow her but was surrounded by reporters and angry guests. His reputation was destroyed. And Callie, the one person who truly mattered, was gone. The next few days were a nightmare for Henry Scott. The headlines wouldn't stop. "Billionaire makes cruel bet with waitress." Henry Scott, the man who turned love into a game. Wall Street scandal, investors abandon Scott's company. Each article was worse than the last. And the worst part? No matter how many times he denied it, no one believed him. The so-called proof Richard Palmer had mentioned was never made public. But the damage was already done. Contracts started disappearing. One by one, major clients canceled deals. Former partners stopped answering his calls. Even longtime friends turned their backs on him. He was alone. And the only person whose opinion really mattered didn't even want to look at him. Henry tried calling Callie dozens of times. Every call went straight to voicemail. He sent messages. No reply. He even tried going to her apartment, but the landlady said she had moved out without leaving an address. Callie had vanished, and with her, any hope Henry had left. Meanwhile, Callie was rebuilding her life. Again. She moved back to the Bronx, rented a tiny room above a laundromat, and tried to forget everything that had happened. But nights were hard. She woke up thinking about Henry, the way he looked at her, the laughter they shared, and then she'd remember the party. Richard's words, the humiliation. She didn't know who to trust anymore, but one thing she knew. She wasn't going to let it destroy her. Not again. Callie started visiting a small community studio in the neighborhood. It was a simple place with worn wooden floors and cracked mirrors, but it had soul. And when she saw a poster looking for a volunteer dance instructor, she didn't think twice. The owner of the studio, a woman named Dorothy, hired her on the spot. "You've got fire in your eyes, girl," Dorothy said, smiling. "That's exactly what we need here." The first classes were small, only 3 students showed up, but Callie taught with passion, showing basic tango steps, correcting posture, making jokes to ease the tension. And little by little, more people started coming. In 2 weeks, the studio was packed. People of all ages came to learn. Nervous teenagers, retired women, even a firefighter trying to impress his girlfriend. Callie felt alive again. She wasn't dancing for money. She wasn't dancing to prove anything. She was dancing because she loved it, and that made all the difference. What she didn't know was, Henry was watching. He had found out where she was through a former employee who still respected him. And every Tuesday and Thursday night, Henry went to the studio, stood across the street, and watched through the window. He saw Callie laughing, teaching, shining, and it made his chest tighten. She was doing well, maybe even better without him. But he couldn't stop going. One night, Dorothy was organizing a small community performance. Nothing big, just the students showing what they had learned to friends and family. Callie agreed to coordinate everything. The day of the performance arrived. The small auditorium at the community center was packed. Rows of plastic chairs, kids running through the aisles, and the smell of popcorn in the air. Callie was backstage helping the students get ready when she heard a stir in the audience. "It's him! The guy from the scandal. Henry Scott is here." Callie felt her stomach twist. She moved closer to the curtain and peeked out. And there he was, sitting in the back row, trying not to draw attention, but clearly being recognized by a few people. Annoyed murmurs started spreading. Someone shouted, "Get out of here, liar!" Another added, "We don't want people like you here." Henry lowered his head, clearly embarrassed, and started to stand to leave. But before he could, Callie stepped onto the stage. "Everyone, may I have your attention, please?" she said, her voice steady. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Callie took a deep breath. "I know many of you recognize the man sitting in the back, and I know what you might be thinking, but before you judge, I'd like to say something. She looked directly at Henry, who was still standing, frozen. No one learns to dance without missing a step. Everyone stumbles, everyone falls, and everyone deserves a chance to try again. The silence was complete. Henry stared at her, eyes shining. I don't know if he did everything they say he did, Callie continued. But I know he showed up here, and that means something. So if you don't mind, I'd like him to stay. Because this performance is about new beginnings, and we all deserve one. People looked at each other. Some still seemed unsure, but little by little they started nodding. Dorothy, sitting in the front row, was the first to clap. Others followed. Henry, emotional, nodded at Callie and sat back down. The performance was a success. The students danced with pride, and the audience applauded each routine. At the end, Callie bowed, and the whole room gave a standing ovation. When everything was over, Henry waited outside the community center. Callie came out about half an hour later, carrying a box of decorations. Hi, he said, nervous. Hi, she replied without stopping. Henry followed her. Callie, thank you for what you did in there. I didn't do it for you. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I know, but still, thank you. They walked in silence for a few steps. Then Henry stopped. Callie, you need to know, that bet, it never happened. Richard made it up. I would never do that to you. Callie stopped too, but didn't turn around. And how do I know you're telling the truth? You don't. But I swear on my grandmother's memory, the only person who ever believed in me, that I never used you. What I feel for you is real. Callie finally turned, her eyes full of tears. And what exactly do you feel for me, Henry? He stepped closer. I love you. I know I don't have the right to say that after everything, but it's the truth. I love you, Callie. Tears ran down her face. I don't know if I can believe you. Then let me prove it. Let me fix this. Callie wiped her face with the back of her hand. How? Henry thought for a moment. The studio. Dorothy told me you need renovations. Let me help. Henry, I don't need your charity. It's not charity, it's a way to show that I care. About you. About what you're doing. Please. Callie hesitated. Every part of her wanted to tell him to leave, but another part, a stubborn, hopeful part, wanted to give him a chance. All right, she finally agreed. But on one condition. What is it? This isn't forgiveness. It's a new beginning, and you're going to have to work hard to earn back my trust. Henry smiled, relieved. I'll work every day if that's what it takes. It will take that, she said, smiling just a little. In the days that followed, Henry showed up at the studio every single day. He painted walls, fixed mirrors, even installed a new floor with help from a carpenter. Callie watched him, torn between frustration and something she didn't want to admit, hope. Little by little, they started talking again. Just small things at first. About the renovation, the students, the weather, but slowly the conversations grew deeper. And the chemistry returned. Slow, careful, but it was there. 2 weeks later, Dorothy called Callie into her office. She was holding a fancy envelope. This came for you today, she said, handing it over. Callie opened it and read. It was a job offer, a position with a dance company in Buenos Aires. The same company her mother had danced with years ago. The salary was excellent, the opportunity, one of a kind. But it meant leaving New York, leaving the studio, leaving Henry. Callie folded the letter, her heart heavy. When do I have to respond? By the end of the week, Dorothy replied. But Callie, this is the chance of a lifetime. You can't turn it down. Callie nodded but didn't say a word. That night, she stayed up late, staring at the letter. Buenos Aires, her mother's dream. Her dream too. But now there was something else, something she hadn't expected to feel again. Henry. And for the first time in a long while, Callie didn't know what to do. Callie spent 3 days looking at that letter like it was an impossible puzzle. Buenos Aires, the city where her mother had shined, the city she had always dreamed of dancing in. But now there was Henry. And the studio. And a life that was finally starting to make sense again. On the 4th day, she gathered the courage to show him the letter. Henry was painting the last wall of the studio when she arrived. He had paint in his hair, on his shirt, even on his face. Callie couldn't help but laugh. You look like an abstract painting, she said. Thanks. I was trying to start a new fashion trend, he replied, wiping his hands on a rag. What do you have there? Callie took a deep breath and handed him the letter. Henry read it silently, his face turning serious. Buenos Aires, he murmured, giving the letter back. That's amazing, Callie. It is, she agreed, waiting for more. Henry forced a smile. You're going to accept it, right? Callie blinked, surprised. You think I should? Of course. It's the chance of your life. Dancing where your mother danced, living her dream, your dream. How could you say no? She crossed her arms. So you want me to go? Henry hesitated. For a moment, it looked like he was about to tell the truth. But then he smiled again, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I want you to be happy, and if Buenos Aires makes you happy, then yes, I want you to go. Callie felt a tightness in her chest. She had hoped he'd ask her to stay, that he'd say he needed her. But he didn't say any of that. All right, she said, putting the letter away. Then I'll accept it. Henry nodded but didn't say another word. He just went back to painting the wall, his movements stiffer than before. Callie walked out of the studio with a lump in her throat. She couldn't tell if she felt relieved or disappointed. 2 days later, she called the dance company in Buenos Aires and accepted the offer. Her flight was scheduled for the following week. Dorothy organized a small farewell party at the studio. The students brought cakes, soda, and even put together a surprise performance for Callie. She cried, laughed, and promised to come back and visit them. Henry was there, standing off to the side, watching it all with a sad smile. When the party was over and everyone had left, Callie and Henry were alone in the empty studio. Moonlight came in through the windows, casting soft shadows on the freshly painted floor. So this is it, Callie said, trying to sound casual. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. I know, Henry replied, hands in his pockets. They stood there still, the silence heavy between them. Then Henry took a step forward. Callie, I need to tell you something before you go. What? He took a deep breath. I lied when I said I wanted you to go. I don't. I want you to stay. But I can't ask you that, because it would be selfish. You deserve to follow your dreams. Callie felt tears sting her eyes. Henry? Let me finish, he said, his voice shaking. You changed my life, Callie. You showed me that not everything can be bought, that some things, some people, are too precious for that. And I love you. I know I've said it before, but now it's different. Now I understand what it really means. Tears streamed down her face. I love you too, you idiot. Henry smiled, eyes glistening. Then we have a problem. We do, she agreed, smiling through the tears. He stepped closer. If you dance that tango in Buenos Aires, I'll be in the audience. I promise. Callie laughed through her tears. You promise? I promise. And then he kissed her. A slow, sweet kiss, filled with everything they hadn't managed to say. When they pulled apart, they were both breathless. Stay with me tonight, Henry said. Before you go. Callie nodded, unable to speak. They spent the night together at his apartment. They talked about everything and nothing, laughed at silly memories, and finally let themselves be completely honest with each other. Henry talked about his lonely childhood, about how he always felt the need to prove himself. Callie spoke about her mother and the fear of not being good enough to follow in her footsteps. And between the serious conversations, there were funny moments. Like when Henry tried to make pancakes for breakfast and burned every single one. Seriously, how do you manage to burn pancakes? Callie asked, laughing as she opened the windows to clear the smoke. It's a talent, he said, tossing the pan into the sink. A terrible talent. They ended up ordering bagels and coffee, and they ate sitting on the living room floor, watching the sunrise through the window. When it was time to head to the airport, Callie already had her suitcase in hand. Henry insisted on driving her. The ride was quiet. Neither of them knew what to say. At the airport, Henry carried her suitcase to the check-in counter. So this is it, Callie said, trying to smile. This is it, Henry repeated. They hugged, and Callie buried her face in his chest, trying to memorize the scent, the warmth, everything. I'm gonna miss you, she whispered. Me too, but you're gonna be amazing out there, I know it. Callie stepped back, wiping her face. You promised you'd be there. And I will, he said firmly. Front row. She smiled, not sure if she should believe him, but she wanted to. With one last look, Callie went through security and disappeared into the crowd. Henry stood there, watching until he couldn't see her anymore. And then, standing alone in the crowded airport, he whispered, I'll be there, Callie. I promise. The flight to Buenos Aires was long and lonely. Callie tried to sleep, but couldn't. She stared out the window, thinking about everything she had left behind. When the plane landed, she felt a mix of excitement and fear. Buenos Aires was exactly how she imagined it. Vibrant, chaotic, full of life. The dance company had arranged a small but cozy apartment for her. And on the first day of rehearsals, Callie met the other dancers. They were talented, dedicated, and welcomed her warmly. But the nights were hard. Callie would walk through the city, visiting places where she knew her mother had once been. Old theaters, historic cafes, plazas where musicians played live tango, and in every place she felt her mother's presence, as if Bethania was right there beside her, smiling, proud. The rehearsals for the big performance were intense. The choreography was complex, emotional, and demanded everything from her. But Callie was determined. Every step was a tribute, every move a promise. The weeks flew by, and before she knew it, the day of the performance had arrived. The Teatro Colón, one of the most prestigious venues in South America, was packed. Over 2,000 seats, all filled. Callie was backstage, heart racing, hands sweating. "Are you ready?" asked the company director, an elegant man named Eduardo. "I think so," she answered, trying to breathe. Eduardo smiled. "You're going to be incredible. Your mother would be proud." Tears threatened to come, but Callie held them back. "Thank you." The music started. The lights dimmed, and Callie walked onto the stage, her heart beating like a drum. She took her position, took a deep breath, and waited. Then the curtains opened. The audience erupted in applause. Callie looked out, trying to focus, but something caught her eye. In the front row, right in the center, was him. Henry. He had kept his promise. He was there, dressed in a perfect suit, smiling at her with shining eyes. Callie felt her heart swell. She wanted to laugh, cry, run to him, but the music had already started. So she did the only thing she could do. She danced. And it wasn't just a dance, it was a statement. Every move was for him. Every turn, a promise. Every step, a piece of her heart given without fear. The audience disappeared, the theater disappeared. It was just her, the music, and Henry watching with a look that said everything. When the dance ended, the theater went silent for a second. Then it exploded. Applause, cheers, people on their feet. Callie took a bow, tears finally streaming down her face. She looked at the front row, searching for Henry, but he was gone. The seat was empty. Callie's smile faded. She looked around, confused, but didn't see him anywhere. Henry had vanished. Callie ran out from backstage as soon as she could. She rushed through the theater halls, pushing open doors, searching every corner. But Henry was nowhere to be found. "Did you see a tall man in a suit sitting in the front row?" she asked a security guard. "Yes, ma'am. He left right after you finished dancing. Seemed like he was in a hurry." Callie felt her chest tighten. Why? Why did he leave without speaking to her? She went back to the dressing room, trying to process it all. Eduardo congratulated her, other dancers hugged her, but she could barely focus. Her mind was on Henry. Back at the apartment, Callie called him, straight to voicemail. She sent messages, no reply. Over the next few days, she tried to stay focused on rehearsals and the remaining shows, but it was impossible. Henry had vanished, and she didn't understand why. Then the rumors started. "I heard he went back to New York," one of the dancers said during a rehearsal break. Callie turned, surprised. "How do you know that?" "I saw it in the news. Henry Scott is involved in some big project there. A donation, I think. I didn't catch the details." Callie grabbed her phone and searched. And there it was. Headlines about Henry Scott donating millions to charity. But the details were vague. She felt even worse. He had left without saying a word. No explanation. As if she didn't matter. 2 weeks later, Callie made a decision. She called Eduardo and asked to end the season early. "But we still have 3 more performances," he said, concerned. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I need to go home." Eduardo sighed but understood. "Are you sure?" "I am." 3 days later, Callie was on a plane back to New York. She looked out the window, watching Buenos Aires fade into the clouds, and felt a mix of relief and sadness. When the plane landed in New York, she took a cab straight to the Bronx. But, as the car passed through downtown, she saw something that made her ask the driver to stop. It was a huge sign in front of a newly renovated building. Bethania Brooks Dance School, in honor of a legend. Callie got out of the cab, her heart racing. She walked to the entrance and pushed the glass door open. The inside was beautiful. Shiny wooden floors, spotless mirrors, perfect lighting, and on the main wall, a giant photo of her mother, young and radiant, dancing tango. Callie covered her mouth with both hands, trying to hold back tears. "Can I help you?" a kind receptionist asked. Who founded this school?" Callie managed to ask. "Mr. Henry Scott. He donated most of his fortune to build community dance schools throughout the city. This is the main one." Callie felt her chest fill with emotion. Henry had done this. For her mother. But then she looked around and frowned. There was no mention of her name anywhere. No plaque, no dedication. Nothing. "Is there any more information about the foundation?" she asked, trying to hide the disappointment. "There's a commemorative plaque in the back. Would you like to see it?" Callie followed the receptionist to a smaller room. On the wall was a bronze plaque with the names of the founders and sponsors. Henry Scott was listed at the top, but Callie's name wasn't there at all. She left the school feeling empty. Henry had done something incredible, but he had left her out of it. Or worse, he had chosen not to include her. Back at the tiny apartment in the Bronx, Callie dropped her suitcase on the floor and sank into the couch. She didn't know if she was angry or hurt, maybe both. Then there was a knock at the door. She opened it and found a courier holding an elegant envelope. "Delivery for Miss Brooks." Callie signed for it and took the envelope. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Henry. With trembling hands, she opened it and pulled out a letter. "Callie, I know you must be confused. I know you must be angry, but I need you to trust me one more time. Meet me where it all began. Tonight at 8. Please. Henry." Callie read the letter 3 times. Where it all began. The Metropolitan Palace. She looked at the clock. It was 6 o'clock. She had 2 hours to decide. Part of her wanted to tear up the letter and forget it. But another part, the stubborn and hopeful part, wanted to go. With a sigh, she pulled out the only decent dress she had and started getting ready. At 7:45, Callie stood in front of the Metropolitan Palace. The building was lit up, just like that night months ago. But now it was empty. No event, no guests. She pushed the door open and walked in. The ballroom looked exactly as she remembered. Crystal chandeliers, shining floor, orchestra set up in the corner. And standing in the center of the room was Henry. He wore a flawless suit, his hair perfectly styled, and he was holding a red rose. When he saw her walk in, he smiled. That smile that always made her heart race. "You came," he said, relieved. Callie crossed her arms, trying to stay firm. "You have exactly 5 minutes to explain why you disappeared in Buenos Aires and why my name isn't on that school." Henry took a step forward. "Can I have 10 minutes? I've got a lot to explain." 5, she insisted. He laughed. "All right, 5 minutes." Henry took a deep breath, like he was about to jump off a cliff. "I left Buenos Aires because I needed to come back here to finish everything. The school, the documents, the renovations. I wanted everything ready before you came back. And why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted it to be a surprise. And because I was afraid you'd tell me not to do it, that you'd think it was charity again." Callie felt her anger soften a little. "And my name? Why isn't it anywhere?" Henry gave a slight smile. "Because your name is going somewhere else, somewhere more important." He held out his hand. Callie hesitated but finally took it. Henry led her to the center of the hall, where a projection began to appear on the floor. Images of documents, blueprints, and then a photo of her and her mother. "The Bethania Brooks School is just the beginning," Henry explained. "I donated most of my fortune to create a foundation. A foundation that will support talented dancers who don't have the means. Scholarships, classes, equipment, everything." The images continued. And then the name of the foundation appeared. Callie Brooks Foundation for the Arts. Callie gasped. "Henry, your name isn't on the school because it's going to be on something bigger," he continued, voice full of emotion. "Something that will help hundreds of people. Just like you helped me." Tears streamed down her face. She couldn't speak. Henry stepped forward and gently held her hands. "Callie, that night here, I challenged you to dance out of arrogance. Today I want to ask you something out of love." He got down on one knee and Callie felt the world stop. "Marry me," Henry said, his voice steady but emotional. "Not because of a bet, not to impress you, but because I love you, and because I can't imagine my life without you." Callie covered her mouth, sobbing. "Henry, I know I don't have the right to ask after everything. he interrupted. I know I hurt you, but I've spent the last few months trying to become the man you deserve, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying if you'll let me. Callie looked at him, the man who had once been so arrogant in this very hall, and she saw someone completely different, someone humble, sincere, in love. You're an idiot, she finally said. Henry blinked, surprised. Is that a yes? No, she replied, smiling through her tears. It's a maybe if you dance a tango with me right now. Henry started laughing. Seriously? Again, but this time no bets, just the two of us. He stood up and gave her an exaggerated bow. It would be an honor, Miss Brooks. The orchestra, which Callie hadn't even noticed was there, began to play. Henry held out his hand and Callie took it. They began to dance, and this time there was no audience. No judgment, just the two of them, in the center of that hall, dancing like the world didn't exist. Henry was still clumsy with a few steps. Callie still teased him, but something was different. There was love. Real, deep, undeniable love. When the music ended, they stood still, looking at each other. So? Henry asked nervously. What's the answer? Callie smiled. The answer is almost. But first, you have to prove one thing. Henry frowned. What? Callie took a step back, her eyes sparkling with fun and challenge. You have to dance a full tango, no mistakes, in front of everyone. With your heart. Henry started laughing. You're kidding. I'm not. That's my final condition. He looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. And he realized she meant it. All right, he agreed, smiling. When? Callie grabbed her phone and typed something quickly. Seconds later, the hall doors opened. Dorothy walked in, followed by all the students from the community studio, and behind them, more people. Friends, acquaintances, even a few investors who still supported Henry. Now? Callie replied, smiling. You're gonna dance now? Henry looked at the small crowd filling the hall and swallowed hard. You planned this? Dorothy helped me. Now come on, Mr. Scott. Show everyone you've learned something. The orchestra started playing again. Henry took a deep breath, held out his hand, and began to dance. And this time he danced with his heart. Henry began to dance, and the whole room held its breath. Everyone remembered the first time, months ago, when he had been awkward and arrogant. But now it was different. He led Callie carefully, his eyes locked on hers. The first step was hesitant, but steady. The second, more confident. And by the third, something magical happened. Henry smiled, not that arrogant smile from before, but a genuine one, full of joy. Callie felt her heart melt. She followed him, letting him lead for the first time. Truly lead. And when the moment came to spin, Henry twirled her with a grace she didn't know he had. The crowd started to murmur, clearly impressed. Dorothy was in the front row with a huge smile on her face. But then, right in the middle of the dance, Henry stepped on his own foot and almost fell. Callie caught him, laughing out loud. You were doing so well, she teased. I know, I ruined it. He replied, laughing too. But instead of stopping, they kept going. And the mistake became part of the dance. Henry improvised a silly move, giving an exaggerated bow as if to apologize. Callie played along, pretending to be offended before pulling him back into the routine. The room burst into laughter and applause. It wasn't a perfect dance. It was better. It was real. And when the music finally ended, Henry gave Callie one last spin and caught her in his arms, both of them out of breath, smiling at each other like they were the only two people in the world. The audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Encouraging voices echoed through the room. Henry looked around, seeing all those people supporting him, people who had every reason to doubt him, but chose to believe instead, and then he got down on one knee. The room went completely silent. Callie covered her mouth with her hands, eyes wide. Henry, what are you doing? Something I should have done a long time ago, he said, voice steady but full of emotion. The first time I asked you to dance here, it was out of arrogance. I wanted to embarrass you, make you look small, and you taught me the biggest lesson of my life. Tears were already rolling down Callie's face. You showed me that money doesn't buy respect, that power means nothing without compassion, and that love, real love, is priceless. He took her hand, holding it gently. Now, I don't want to humiliate you, I want to honor you, every day for the rest of my life. Callie Brooks, will you marry me? The room was completely still. Everyone waited for her answer. Callie looked at him, seeing the man who had changed so much. The man who had given up nearly everything. The man who once flew to Buenos Aires just to watch her dance. But she also saw the man who still had a lot to prove. "Henry, I need to know that you've truly changed," she said, her voice trembling. "Not just for me, for yourself." Henry nodded and stood. "I understand, and I've already started." He gave a signal to someone in the crowd. A man in a suit stepped forward, carrying a folder. Henry pulled out some documents and handed them to Callie. "What's this?" she asked, confused. "These are the papers for 5 community schools for dance and music that I helped establish over the past 2 months. Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, Harlem, and Staten Island. All in honor of your mother, and all with full scholarships for young talent." Callie looked through the papers, her hands shaking. They were real contracts, signatures, all official. The room erupted in applause. Dorothy was crying. The students from the studio were cheering with joy. You really did all this?" Callie whispered, barely believing it. "I did, because you taught me that real wealth isn't about how much you have, but how much you give." Callie let the documents fall and threw her arms around Henry, sobbing. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair. "So, is that a yes?" he asked, hopeful. Callie stepped back, wiping her face. "It's almost a yes," Henry blinked. "Almost?" "Almost. I still have one condition." He sighed, but he was smiling. "Of course you do. What is it?" Callie looked around at all the people who had come to support them. Then she looked back at Henry. "You have to promise that you'll never underestimate me again, that you'll treat me like a true partner, that you'll listen when I speak, and that you'll never, ever investigate my life without my permission again." Henry looked at her. "Serious. I promise. All of it. I swear. And one more thing." "What's that?" Callie smiled playfully. "You're going to have to learn how to cook, because if we're getting married, I'm not spending the rest of my life eating burnt food." The room erupted in laughter. Henry laughed too, shaking his head. "All right. I promise I'll learn to cook, or at least try not to set the kitchen on fire." "Good," Callie said. "Then yes. Now it's a yes. I will marry you, Henry Scott." The room exploded with cheers. Applause, shouts, whistles. Dorothy rushed to the stage and hugged them both. The studio students joined in, forming a big circle of hugs and joy. Henry held Callie's face in both hands and kissed her. A long, sweet kiss full of promises. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling so much they could barely stop. "I love you," Henry said. "I love you too, even if you're terrible in the kitchen," Callie replied, laughing. The party that followed was spontaneous and chaotic. The orchestra kept playing, people danced, and someone showed up with champagne no one knew where it came from. Dorothy pulled Henry aside. "You're lucky, young man. That girl is pure gold." "I know," he agreed, watching Callie laugh with the students. "I'm very lucky. And you'd better not mess this up," Dorothy warned, pointing a finger at him. "Because if you hurt her again, you'll have to answer to me." Henry laughed. "Yes, ma'am. I promise I won't mess it up." On the other side of the room, Callie was talking to one of the youngest students, a shy girl named Emma. "Are you going to keep teaching?" Emma asked hopefully. "I am," Callie assured her. "No matter what happens, I'll always be here." "Even if you marry a billionaire?" Callie laughed. "Even if I marry a billionaire, because dancing isn't about money, it's about passion, and I'll never give that up." The evening went on with more dancing, more laughter, and plenty of stories being shared. Henry even tried to give a speech, but froze halfway through and asked Callie to finish it for him. "I just want to thank all of you," Callie said, holding Henry's hand, "for believing in us, for giving us a second chance, and for reminding me that no matter how many times we fall, we can always get back up and dance again." The room applauded, moved. When the party finally started to wind down, it was past midnight. Henry and Callie stayed behind in the empty hall, sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. "So now we're really getting married," Callie said, still processing it. "Looks like it," Henry replied with a smile. "Are you nervous?" "A little? You?" "Terrified," Callie laughed. "At least you're honest." They were quiet for a moment, just enjoying each other's company. "Callie," Henry said suddenly, "there's something I haven't told you." She turned to him, alert. "What is it?" "Your father, Richard Palmer. He reached out to me last week." Callie tensed. "What did he want?" "To apologize. For the scandal, the lie about the bet. He said he was trying to protect you, just in the wrong way." And you believed him? Henry shrugged. I'm not sure, but he asked if he could be at the wedding. He said he wants a chance to make things right. Kali closed her eyes, thinking it over. And what did you say? That it's your decision, not mine. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive him, but maybe someday. Maybe at the wedding he can be there. From a distance. Henry nodded. Whatever you want. I support you. Kali rested her head on his shoulder. Thank you for telling me. Always, he promised. They stayed there until almost 2 a.m, talking about the future, about their plans, about the life they were going to build together. And when they finally got up to leave, Kali looked around the hall one last time. This is where it all started, she whispered. And this is where everything begins again, Henry added, taking her hand. They walked out of the Metropolitan Palace hand in hand, ready for the next chapter in their lives. But before they could leave completely, Kali stopped. Henry? Yes? You do know you'll have to plan an entire wedding now, right? Decorations, food, guests. Henry went pale. I hadn't thought of that, Kali laughed. Relax, I'll help, but only if you promise not to hire anyone to investigate the caterers. I promise, he said, laughing too. The months that followed were a whirlwind of organized chaos. Kali discovered that planning a wedding was harder than choreographing an entire show. There were flowers, invitations, the menu, music, and a million other decisions she never imagined she'd have to make. Henry tried to help, but his suggestions usually made things more complicated. How about hiring 5 different orchestras? He suggested one afternoon while they were reviewing options. Kali looked at him like he'd grown a second head. Henry, this is a wedding, not a music festival. But it would be impressive. It would be ridiculous. 1 orchestra. Just 1. He sighed, defeated. All right, you're the boss. Dorothy became the unofficial official wedding planner. She showed up at Kali's apartment almost every day with new ideas, cake samples, and very strong opinions about everything. This dress is lovely, but you need one with more sparkle, she said, showing pictures. Dorothy, I don't want to look like a disco ball, Kali protested. You won't. You'll look like a princess. In the end, Kali chose as a simple, elegant dress with delicate lace and a short train. When Henry saw her at the rehearsal, he was speechless. You look ridiculous? Kali asked, a little unsure. Perfect. You look perfect. The wedding day finally arrived. It was a sunny autumn morning, with blue skies and the trees in Central Park painted in shades of gold and red. The ceremony was set to take place outdoors, in a private garden that Henry had rented. White chairs lined up, flowers everywhere, and a decorated arch where they would exchange their vows. But as expected, not everything went according to plan. The florist delivered red roses instead of peach ones. The photographer arrived an hour late, and the cake, which was supposed to have 3 tiers, showed up with only 2 because the top one had fallen off along the way. This is a disaster, Kali muttered, staring at the mangled cake. Dorothy shrugged. Sweetheart, there's no such thing as a perfect wedding. What matters is the ending. Kali took a deep breath and nodded. You're right, let's keep going. Guests started to arrive. Friends, students from the studio, Henry's coworkers, and even some investors who had come back to support him. The garden was full, but the atmosphere was light and joyful. Then, as Kali waited backstage, getting ready to walk down the aisle, she saw someone she wasn't expecting. Richard Palmer. He was standing near the last row of chairs, wearing a simple suit, his face tense. When their eyes met, he gave a small wave. Kali hesitated. Part of her wanted to send him away, but another part, the part that was learning to forgive, just nodded back. The music began. Kali gripped the bouquet tightly and started walking down the aisle. Everyone stood, turning to look at her, but she only had eyes for Henry. He was standing at the altar, perfectly dressed, his eyes full of emotion. And when she reached him, he whispered, You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You're not too bad yourself, she replied, smiling. The officiant began the ceremony. He spoke about love, about commitment, about 2 people who found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. Then came the vows. Henry took Kali's hands, took a deep breath, and began. Kali, when I met you, I was an arrogant fool who thought I could buy anything. And you proved me wrong. You taught me humility, generosity, and what love really means. I promise to honor you every day. I promise to make you laugh, even when you're mad at me. And I promise never to burn the food again." The crowd laughed. Callie was crying and laughing at the same time. "And I promise to dance with you. Always. No matter how many times I step on your feet." Callie wiped her face and began her vows. "Henry, you've gotten on my nerves since day one. But you also showed me that it's possible to change, to grow, and to become someone better. You believed in me when no one else did. You gave me hope when I thought I'd lost everything. And you loved me even when I didn't make it easy. I promise to stand by your side. I promise to tease you when you're being stubborn. And I promise never to let you cook alone." The guests burst into laughter. Henry was smiling so much it looked like his face might crack. The officiant concluded the ceremony. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Henry didn't wait to be asked twice. He pulled Callie close and kissed her, as the entire garden erupted in applause and cheers. The reception that followed was exactly what Callie had wanted. Nothing too formal, just people who loved each other, having fun. The food was delicious, the music was perfect, and the 2-tier cake turned out to be more than enough. During the celebration, Richard Palmer approached Callie timidly. "Can I speak with you?" he asked nervously. Callie looked at Henry, who gave an encouraging nod. She led her father to a quieter corner of the garden. "Thank you for letting me come," Richard said, his voice shaking. "I didn't deserve it." "No, you didn't," Callie replied bluntly. "But I'm learning that forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about moving forward." Richard wiped his eyes. "I made a lot of mistakes with you and your mother, and I know I'll never be able to fix that. But if you give me a chance, I'd like to try to be a real father. Even if it's late." Callie was silent for a moment. Then she sighed. "One chance. Just one. Don't waste it." Richard nodded, emotional. "I won't. I promise." They went back to the party, and Callie felt something let go inside her. Forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it made room for the future. When it was time for the first dance, Henry took Callie to the center of the dance floor. The orchestra began to play a slow, romantic tango. "Ready to impress me?" Callie teased. "Ready to try not to fall," Henry replied, smiling. They started dancing. And this time, it wasn't a competition. It wasn't a challenge. It was just two people who loved each other, moving together in perfect harmony. Henry still missed a few steps. Callie still teased him, but every mistake was followed by a smile, a laugh, a moment of pure joy. When the music ended, the crowd gave them a standing ovation. Henry spun Callie one last time and held her close, whispering in her ear, "Thank you for teaching me how to dance." "Thank you for learning," she replied. The party went on into the night, and when it was finally winding down, Henry and Callie sat at an empty table watching the last guests leave. "So, Mrs. Scott," Henry said, taking her hand. "What are the plans for the future?" Callie smiled. "Well, I was thinking about expanding the dance schools, maybe open a few more in other states." "I love that idea. What else?" "I want to keep teaching. No matter how big we get, I'll never stop teaching," Henry nodded. "And I'll support you in everything." "What else?" Callie looked at him, her eyes shining. "And I want us to keep dancing. No matter what happens, I want us to set aside time every week just to dance together." "Deal," said Henry, standing and holding out his hand. "How about we start now?" Callie took his hand and they returned to the empty dance floor. No music, no crowd, just the two of them under the soft lights of the garden. And they danced. A slow, improvised tango, full of love and promises. "Let's never use tango as a challenge again," Callie murmured. "Never again," Henry agreed. "Only as a language of love." They kept dancing, turning slowly under the stars while the rest of the world faded away around them. And in that moment, Callie knew she had found her place. Not on a stage, not in any specific city, but right there, in Henry's arms, dancing the tango that would never end. The tango of true love. What did you think of Callie and Henry's story? Share your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to keep up with all our stories. And don't forget to check out more heartwarming stories right here on the end screen.